Hi everybody. In this video, we'll show you what it's like to visit remote islands on a live-aboard dive boat when you're a beginning diver. When John, Mike, Vicky, and I first made our plans back in March 2017 to go diving off the coast of Baja at the Socorro Islands in May of 2018, I was confident I would have lots of dives under my belt and could easily handle this advanced dive site. After all, it was over a year away, so I figured how hard could it be to learn to dive and get the recommended 25 plus dives in before taking this adventure? Well, as it turns out, that was not an easy task at all. Learning to scuba dive was much harder for me than I expected. I had numerous starts and stops and only learned how to dive when I took private lessons from a high-quality local dive shop, Channel Island Scuba. My instructor and the store owner, Mike, was amazing, and after a year of trying, I finally obtained my certification in April 2018, just 1 month before our trip. John and I went out with Mike and Vicky on their boat the following weekend so I could get at least 2 more dives in. It was awesome, and we swam with a sea lion and visited a shipwreck, even though the visibility was typically poor during the spring plankton bloom. I felt much more comfortable, but not sure my whopping 7 dives was ideal for our upcoming trip to Mexico. The Riva Yajeros Islands, or Soccorros as most people call them, are a group of 4 volcanic islands about 240 miles southwest of Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. It takes about a day and a half to get to the islands by boat, and you're not able to camp on any of them, so a live-aboard is the only way to experience these pristine islands. We went out on the Nautilus Undersea, which we highly recommend. The staff was knowledgeable and helpful, the living conditions were comfortable, and the food was absolutely amazing. There were 16 of us on board with 9 staff members. We all met in Cabo to catch the Nautilus Undersea and were supposed to load the boat around 3 p.m. There was a delay with getting the supplies on board, so our actual departure time was closer to 9 p.m. At least, I think it was. Since we were never quite sure what time the boat was actually boarding, we didn't want to wander too far away, so we decided to hang out in the fun local bars. Well, we had a blast, but none of us remember much about boarding the boat, especially after a particularly wild visit to the Giggling Marlin. Our first full day was at sea, which was perfect since we were all a bit hungover. We sat on the deck, took in some much-needed sunshine, we set up our gear, relaxed, and enjoyed the evening sunset. The next morning, we arrived at our first stop, San Benedicto Island. This is a beautiful young volcanic island, and we were able to capture some great footage with the drone. As we were all preparing, the dive master came over to me to discuss my capabilities. When I told her I had 7 dives, she said, 7? And then indicated I needed to stick with her. John explained that he too was a dive master and was not going to leave my side. I could tell she was a bit apprehensive, but once we were in the water and she saw how attentive John was to me, she relaxed. And for each dive, we took a small skiff to get closer to the island. On the first dive, we were instructed to fall backwards into the water. Seeing as how I had never fallen backwards off a boat, I was a bit anxious. John laughed and told me it was just like falling off a log. I hesitantly fell back and quickly realized it was literally like falling off a log. It is now my favorite way to get into the water. Once in the water, I was amazed at the beauty and magnitude of the dive site. The water was clear and so blue, nothing like the green waters of California. It was a bit disconcerting that I couldn't see the bottom. It looked like it went on forever. And none of my training had really prepared me for this, and I could see why they say that is a more advanced dive site. I could only have done this trip with John by my side. He was incredibly patient and helpful, and kept me from getting myself into trouble. The water was full of amazing sea life, and we were often surrounded by schools of fish. Since I was new to diving, I used my air faster than expected. So after about 30 minutes, John and I made our way to the surface. So John and all but one other person on our trip were using what's called rebreathers. They are a more advanced dive equipment that allows users to recirculate gases by removing carbon dioxide and replacing any oxygen that was consumed by the body. This means they're able to go deeper and stay down much longer than anyone using a tank like I was. It really bothered me that we had to come up so quickly, as we hadn't seen any of the large pelagic sea life yet, which is one of the reasons we went, and John could have easily stayed down over twice as long. And to make matters worse, as we were heading up, I looked down and saw a giant manta ray swimming just above the other divers. I felt horrible that we were missing it. Once the skiff brought us back to the boat, I actually even began crying, as I felt that I was going to ruin John's dive experience. He assured me I wasn't, and reminded me it was just our first dive. As the other divers made their way back, I asked what it was like to see the giant manta ray, and they all indicated they hadn't seen any mantas. I looked at John and he just smiled. I guess the all-white underbelly of the mantas can make it hard to see them from below. We were lucky that we saw it. The crew would tease me about my beginner's luck throughout the rest of our trip. That night, the boat offered a night snorkel with sharks. Sounded like fun, so John and I signed up. Of course, I thought everyone else would do it too, but it turned out to be John and I plus one other diver. I was becoming a bit anxious over that fact and wasn't sure what to expect, but we'd committed. And it turned out to be so much more fun than I had expected. The silky sharks were bigger than I had imagined. They were about 6 feet, and we had several of them swimming around us. They were relatively friendly and reminded me of like a house cat, as they would rub up against us. And I have to admit, that took some getting used to, but each time they did it, it just made me laugh out loud. And the dive master who was with us said my reaction was not something she had experienced before, but she loved it, and so she kept egging the sharks on with bait. At the end, one shark came a little too close to my hand, and without thinking, I just tapped it away. And of course, John caught it all on video, and we've had a good laugh about it ever since. While we slept that night, the boat made its way to the next dive location, which was actually Socorro Island. Each day, the crew had 4 dives planned. John, Mike, Vicky, and I always did the morning dives. Then John and Mike would do one of the afternoon dives. I really liked this plan, as I knew that with Mike, John would be able to go much deeper and stay down longer than he would with me. And Vicky and I could then relax on deck. It did mean that they would see things that we wouldn't, and on one dive they came across 2 very playful dolphins. I was disappointed I didn't get to see them, but the footage that John captured made me feel as if I were there, and it was fun to see how the dolphin was concerned that John wasn't blowing bubbles. Admittedly, the best dive moment we had was on my 13th dive. We were at Roca Partida, which is a large rock that protrudes out of the water. It is a steep wall underwater and had a wealth of sea life around it. As John and I were heading to the surface, we saw a manta ray swimming around the divers below us. Once again, I felt bad for missing the magnificent show, and suddenly John pointed behind me. When I turned around, I could not believe my eyes. Coming right at us was a beautiful and often elusive 35-foot whale shark. He was swimming right for us. I could see all the other divers quickly swimming up to get a better shot of this amazing creature, but John and I had the front row seat for this one. At one point, we actually thought he was going to bump into us, and he came so close we could have touched him. The wide-angle lens that John was using doesn't truly capture how close he got to us, even though it looks pretty amazing. And the manta ray that everyone was interacting with, the one that I felt bad for missing, he did not appreciate the whale shark taking the spotlight off him, and he came up to push him away. John and I were treated to the most spectacular show. Once we were all back on board, many of the other divers said they had been waiting for years, some as many as 30 years, to see a whale shark. For us to get that close made the whole trip worthwhile. At this point, I was pretty content with the entire trip, but our luck didn't stop with the whale shark. On our last dive at a site called El Boiler, just off San Benedicto Island, John and I were treated to 3 giant manta rays swimming around us. At one point, I had to duck my head as a manta ray swam over. It was then I realized that I hadn't really held John back at all. We both experienced as much, if not more, as everyone else. The best life experiences happen when we aren't looking for them. And while I'm not good at it yet, I'm learning to just enjoy life and take it as it comes. Our Soccorro trip was amazing, and while I wasn't as prepared from a dive perspective as I should have been, John, Mike, Vicky, and all the crew of Nautilus Undersea ensured I had a safe and enjoyable experience. It's certainly one I will never forget. If you love diving, seeing large pelagic sea life, and enjoy a more desert, volcanic type scenery, we highly recommend going to the Socorro Islands, and most certainly taking the Nautilus dive boats.